Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session of our Paving the Way for Responsible Business Conduct in the Decade of Action webinar series. My name is Daria Naglick, and I am the Senior Manager, Programs and Business Relations here at Global Compact Network Canada. Today's session, Building Resilience, the Evolving Role of Corporate Governance, will discuss how businesses are actively working against corruption and strengthening corporate governance frameworks and participating in collective action, and how this can drive positive outcomes and bring forth about systemic change. Our panelists today will share their experiences and expertise, highlighting some best practices, lessons learned, and the importance for businesses to prioritize their commitments to anti-corruption, the fourth pillar and 10th principle of the UN Global Compact's 10 principles. Introducing today's panelists, we have Marion Van Hoek, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer at BASF Canada; Neelam Sandhu, Senior Vice President and Chief Elite Customer Success Officer at Blackberry, as well as Patricia Allen, Head of the Integrity Program at SNC Lavaland. Thank you all for being with us here today. The objective of the 10th principle is to go beyond avoiding traditional forms of corruption such as bribery and extortion. It aims to help inspire organizations to take a proactive approach to fighting corruption by developing policies and programs that transcend a company's internal ecosystem to include their supply chains as well. Hindering social and economic development and amplified by the global pandemic, corruption undermines, among many things, the rule of law, while disproportionately impacting poor communities. For organizations to ignore corruption or fail to create safeguards for their business, the ethical and business risks are high and may even bear financial costs. We also know that there are significant linkages between anti-corruption and human rights, supply chains, and investor corporate engagement. For organizations to promote cleaner business environments, it is essential that they evaluate and address their stakeholder responsibilities while developing cross-functional programs and partnerships with other organizations around compliance issues. Now, before we begin our panel discussion, we'd like to open up the discussion with a question for the audience. Please take a moment to open up a new browser and join slido.com, where you can enter the code displayed on the screen. And it'll also be in the chat box as well. The code is R718. I'll give everyone a quick moment to do this. We'll also be asking a few more questions via Slido throughout the session, so please keep this tab open throughout. So if everyone can just please open slido.com. We will soon display all of the questions on the screen. For our first Slido question, just give me 1 second. There we go. We'd like to ask, what comes to mind when you hear the word corruption? Please type in your answers and they'll populate the screen here for everyone to see. Okay, we have some answers starting to come in. Okay, we'll just add another 20 seconds and give everyone a chance to provide their answer. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. To begin our discussion, I'd like to start with asking Marion the first question. We know that corruption is wrong, in many cases illegal, and can significantly impact the reputation of an organization. From your organization's perspective, can you explain the business case against corruption and how these actions harm businesses, the marketplace, and the community? You can also please begin by telling us a little bit about your role at BASF Canada.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. And for those who are not familiar with BASF, we are a German-based chemical manufacturing company, and we operate in more than 90 countries with 110,000 employees. And my role is General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for BSF Canada, so the Canadian subsidiary of our German-based parent company. And our portfolio of products is organized into 6 broad segments: chemicals, materials, industrial solutions, surface technologies, nutrition and care, and agricultural solutions. And because we operate in so many sectors and industries across the world, there's a very strong business case for taking a clear and absolute position against corruption. Corruption can affect our business and the industries in which we operate as a whole. Bribery and corruption can lead to decisions that are not based on objective criteria and therefore run the risk of distorting and damaging the free and fair trade that we believe in, and that trade on which our business model is built. So only by eliminating corruption as a whole can we ensure that everyone is treated fairly when it comes to obtaining a job, obtaining a permit, or obtaining a contract. And this is really key to the long-term sustainability of our company. And with that is also the reputation piece, which is also imperative to our company's long-term sustainability. You've no doubt heard the expression that a person's reputation takes years to build and minutes to destroy. And I would say that's definitely true for a multinational company. Acting and doing business in an ethical manner and with integrity is a key component to maintaining our reputation, both internally with our employees, but also externally with our shareholders, customers, and suppliers. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Marion, for providing that overview and getting us started. Patricia, from your organization's perspective, can you explain the business case against corruption and how these actions harm businesses, the marketplace, and the community? And please begin by telling us a little bit about your role at SNC Lavaland.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm responsible for the integrity program at SNC Lavaland. For the ones that don't know SNC, it's an engineering firm. We're over 37,000 employees. We're in 30 different countries. We've been around for over 100 years already. We're well known in Canada mostly because of past events. So, you know, SNC Lavaland knows from firsthand the negative impact related to taking bad decision or having corruption issues. If we think about things that happened before 2012, there were some corruption issues that happened at SNC Lavaland with previous executive. Thank God all of them are gone now. But all of these events brought us to be sanctioned by the World Bank for 10 years. Obviously, once you're sanctioned by the World Bank, you're also sanctioned by other multilateral development banks. We had criminal charges also against us and so on. So obviously for our board or C-suite and all of our employees, having a very rigorous anti-corruption program is a priority, because we know well now what is the cost of corruption and non-compliance. It's the cost, it was astronomical for SNC Lavaland. We lost tons of great employees. We lost projects that we were working on. We lost also business partners, suppliers. Our shares also really just dropped. And in like Marianne said earlier, it takes just one little action for you to lose your reputation, but it takes years and years to gain it back. So for everyone at SNC, it's really important. It's a priority for us to change this. And this is the reason why we've invested so much in making sure that we build a culture of integrity by having a very strong, rigorous program that made it possible that we had an early release from the World Bank sanction this year, just in April, for which we're really proud of. And their program also has been recognized by Ethisphere as a compliance leader verification, so the CLV. So, they could also be, you could turn negative impact and turn it in the right way. And for us, there's no more questions about, do we need to do that or not? It's obvious. We definitely need to.
Thank you, Patricia, for sharing SNC Lavaland's story and really highlighting how integral anti-corruption measures really are. Neelam, can you share Blackberry's perspective on the business case against corruption, and tell us a little bit about the effects on the marketplace and the community from your perspective? And if you could please begin by telling us a little bit about your role at Blackberry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me here today and for the question. So my name is Neelam, as you mentioned. I work for Blackberry. I'm based in in one of our US offices in California, and I'm responsible for two or three different things. So one is our elite customers. Secondly, business operations for the office of the CEO. And then the third piece rolls into that, which is our CSR strategy as well. So Blackberry, I'm hoping that more and more people are familiar with what we're doing today. So we have moved on from being a smartphone manufacturer, but the DNA of what we do today has stayed true to that heritage. So we're today a software company focused on cybersecurity and connectivity and security in the IoT. And so with that, with cybersecurity, it's so important that our customers trust our products, because we are essentially there to ensure that their environment is secure. So from our perspective, just from our strategic perspective, the component of anti-corruption is so critical to establishing trust with our customers. And with that, most of our customer base is in the regulated space. That would be, for example, governments, financial services. And it is in countries where the corruption score is low. So US, Canada, for example, and we work very closely with governments around the world. And so for us, making sure that we have a very, very robust and clear and transparent anti-corruption set of policies and frameworks and post audit as well of our operations is key to our business success. And then additive to that, I mean, the countries that we operate in, the laws are very, very clear, and so having to adhere to those laws is essential to being able to operate in those countries. And finally, not just because it's becoming more of a conversation today around the world, but even prior to that, diversity, inclusion, fairness are very important to our, not just our business success, but the culture that we want to promote across the company. And with fairness, it's not just about our hiring practices, but it's also what we're talking about today, ensuring that the way that we operate in the marketplace is fair, is transparent, and gives not just our employees an equal playing field against one another, but the competition too. So we like to fight fair. Of course, we like to win, but always in a fair and transparent way, in a way that our customers are proud of too, and continue to support us.
Thank you, Neelam, for sharing those insights with us. Moving on to our second question. Patricia, I'd like to begin with you. The 10th principle of the UN Global Compact states that businesses should work against corruption in all its forms. What are some of the strongest anti-corruption measures that your organization has in place, and how do you actively work against corruption?
Interesting question. It's not easy to answer in just a minute. So what we've done at SNC Lavaland is really, our program is focused on three major axes. So prevent, detect, respond. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what we do for each of these axes, which may help understanding some of the measures that we've taken and implemented in their program. So obviously everything starts with the governance framework. We're talking about governance today. It's really, really utmost important that you look at who's doing what, when, how. Those rules needs to be set right at the top. And obviously after that, I would suggest that you have at least like 4 governance documents that will drive you through a very rigorous program, such as obviously the code of conduct that would be addressed to your employees. So exactly what they can do and so on. You need to make sure that they understand well the expectation. A LOA, so a level of approval. So who can approve what, when, under which threshold also clears out who needs to look at what. I would say, obviously, a anti-bribery or anti-corruption or compliance procedure or policy, whatever you want to call it, which really would address some of the basic topics related to corruption. So example, like how you deal with your business partners, the due diligence that you will do, the duty to report, facilitation payments, what is possible for employees to do. And if they see anything, any concerns, what they need to do about it. And for third parties, there's also a very important governance document that needs to be done, which is the Supplier Code of Conduct, because you also need to make sure that your supply chain, including people that will act on your behalf, will also respect your expectation towards corruptions and so on. You cannot have any governance document without having also internal controls, because you also need to make sure that they work. So making sure also that those are clear. I would say also make sure that the governance document, and I'm sorry for the lawyers in the room, but are not written necessarily for lawyers. Make sure that it addresses the right level of language of your employees, because they're the one that needs to respect it. Obviously, in the prevent, you also need to have a strong training program, making sure that all employees really understand what is expected from them. Then in the detect zone, I got another couple of examples. All of our third parties, we do integrity checks on them, including sometimes even our clients. When we work internationally, automatically we'll also do an integrity check on our clients, because we want to work with the right people too. When it's a business partner, obviously, beside like every supplier will do an integrity check for business partners. So everyone that will work on our behalf, we would actually do a more thorough due diligence. If it is the case of rep and sponsors, those due diligence actually needs to be approved even by the sector president, and also have a clearance by the chief integrity officer of the organization. And every one of them is actually reported also to the board, which is responsible for the governance of SNC Lavaland. Last thing also for detect portion, we do what we call a compliance control framework, where we actually really test the effectiveness of our program and making sure to address anything that doesn't go right or people do not understand correctly. We prefer to do that to prevent misbehaviors in advance when we can. And lastly, respond. Everyone usually talks a lot about, responding to bad behaviors and misconduct, but I will tell you today that you also need to incentivize good behavior. So, include integrity with or ethics within your performance management for all employees. Include it as a component also of your bonus scheme, as we did. So every managers that have a bonus within SNC Lavaland has also a portion of integrity for which you need to satisfy all measures in it to be able to get their bonus. And that is depending on your own criteria or objectives. So in a nutshell, that's what we consider as having a very strong program.
Thank you, Patricia, for those great efforts and examples. Neelam, can you tell us a little bit about some of the strongest anti-corruption measures that your organization has in place, and how do you actively work against corruption?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a very similar set of measures, so similar answer to what Patricia just described. So we have a business code of conduct, which is a fairly lengthy document, but again, as Patricia described, we've made sure that it's written in a way that is not overly lawyer speak, so that people who are consuming it can digest it and take it on board. And we do require all employees to have read it and take a test to confirm that they have understood it, and that's done on an annual basis. So even if an employee has been with the company for multiple years, they have a refresh every single year. And the document includes what you would expect, so training and guidance and guidelines around anti-bribery and other anti-corruption components as well. So that's kind of I guess would say the foundation. And every employee is required to adhere to it. We do checks and balances throughout the year, as well as at the end of every reporting period, where we have external auditors check our operations, and our audit committee as well, which is a component of our board of directors, pay attention and have oversight of any issues, the documentation itself, and the guidelines that we have put in place for the company. And I think that is extremely important for any company, whether they're publicly traded, private, or an NGO or any other type of organization. The requirements, the visibility, the effort on something like this, whilst it's more operational and can be sometimes seen as perhaps this is too strong of a term, but a bit of an afterthought after the main kind of the obvious business results, which are revenue related. It's extremely important that the board, as well as the C-suite, are very, very committed to these measures, and the message is coming top down, as well as the example is coming top down. So everybody has to be equally accountable from the bottom all the way to the top. And then secondly, we have a supplier code of conduct as well. So we require our ecosystem across the supply chain and any other type of partnerships that we have to adhere to the same level of ethics. And there really is no getting around that. So if it's a big partner and they're well known in the industry and there is an issue there, like that, there's no kind of giving them a second chance in that sense. Like it is really core to our business, and we make sure that everybody knows that and adheres to that for our business, but also for the wider community and economic and diversity reasons.
Thank you, Neelam, for providing those great examples. Marion, can you please tell us what are some of the strongest anti-corruption measures that BASF Canada has in place, and how do you actively work against corruption?
Great, thank you for the question. And some of this may sound repetitive because our other speakers have covered many of these important things. Of course, we ensure that our anti-corruption measures and practices are present throughout the organization and also at different touch points. So a great example is the business partner due diligence program. And that program requires our BASF colleagues to complete a certain amount of due diligence on proposed business partners that they want to engage with. And this is just an example of the processes and checks, and the importance is that they exist throughout the company and throughout the various touch points. As already noted by Neelam and Patricia, that I think what is key here is that the company is unequivocal and vocal about where they stand when it comes to corruption, that you leave no question both to your employees as well as to your customers and suppliers about where you stand and how you view this topic. So at BASF, anti-corruption is central to our commitment to ethical business conduct. And in order to ensure we are very clear about it, we have also embedded this into our code of conduct. So our code of conduct is a values-based code of conduct. And one of the values is we earn trust. So within this trust value, we are very clear that as a company, we're committed to fighting any kind of corruption or bribery, that we expect our colleagues to treat all business partners fairly and compete for business based on the quality of our products and our services. And by embedding this into our code of conduct, we're not just communicating this value to our employees, but also to third parties and external entities. As previously mentioned, our employees are trained on the code on a yearly basis. This is mandatory, so it's not just written down in a place where no one reads it. It is key that the code translates into everyday business practices, and that this is done from the top. The expectation is that our leaders are conducting themselves in accordance with the code, and it applies to every employee, regardless of your role or position within the company. Finally, we also have a compliance hotline, and this is a place where our colleagues or third parties can file complaints related to actual or suspected violations. And this mechanism is key to ensuring that any business practices that are not in line with the global code of conduct, that there's a mechanism for reporting those. And if individuals wish to do so on an anonymous basis, they can do that. This is key for compliance reasons, because our compliance team obviously cannot be everywhere. So it's important that we provide our colleagues with ways to report any concerns or observations that they have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marion, for outlining those great examples for us. I'd like to ask the audience now to return to their Slido browser for our second question. This one will be multiple choice. How does your company communicate its anti-corruption measures? A, formal policy. B, providing training and education opportunities. C, internal communications. D, informally or on a case-by-case or need-to-know basis. E, a combination of options 1 through 4, or F, unsure. Okay, and we'll give everyone about 20 seconds to respond. Okay, we seem to have a really clear majority here. It's great to see everyone's answers pouring in. Okay, a couple more seconds. Okay, fantastic. Thank you everyone for participating. It's really great to see all of your answers. Okay, for our next question, I'd like to start with asking you, Neelam. Collective action, the joint efforts of the private sector, government, NGOs, and civil society, is the only way to bring about systemic change and end corruption. What are some examples of how your company engages in collective action to prevent corruption?
Great question. Yes, thank you. There's a few different components to this. The first would be from a supply chain perspective. So we do have a policy in place and QA quality assurance checks along the way as well to ensure our suppliers are adhering to the highest standards of ethics, but also trust when it comes to how they build their products as well. I know that is becoming a more and more of a important topic to key governments like the US government and the Canadian government, supply chain security and supply chain ethics. So that's one area. So as we uphold ourselves to the highest standards and require our supplier partners to as well, the expectation is that begins to permeate and translate to more and more organizations, if that is not the case in their operations already. And so by default, if they're not adhering to those, they're losing out on business. So it encourages them to adhere to the standards as well. Secondly, we do work closely with different governments around the world on setting standards as well as making sure we're adhering to them. So standard setting, and should there be any instances of corruption that they may say that we could help them to investigate or address, we adhere to lawful access requests and support governments with that information. So I would say it's across the board, whether it's a revenue related partnership, as I mentioned, with a supplier, working with NGOs, working with the government, to ensure that what we're doing is right, but also across the ecosystem and helping to set standards. So that's becoming more and more of a key focus for us, particularly with supply chain security and supply chain trust.
Thank you, Neelam, for sharing those examples with us. Marion, can you tell us what are some examples of how your company engages in collective action to prevent corruption?
Sure, thank you for the question. As a global manufacturing company, integrity in procurement is key. So similar to what Neelam mentioned earlier, we also have a supplier code of conduct, and that code sets out the expectations that we have of our suppliers. And one of the key messages is that we communicate that our suppliers are selected and evaluated not just based on the economic criteria. So beyond the economic offering, we look closely at our suppliers in the context of environmental protection, compliance with human rights, labor and social standards, as well as anti-discrimination and anti-corruption policies. So we make it clear that we expect our suppliers to fully comply with applicable laws and internationally recognized environmental, social, and corporate governance standards. And our supplier code of conduct is inspired in part by the United Nations Global Compact initiative. So in addition to expecting that level of integrity from our suppliers, we're also engaging with industry associations and other companies on this topic. The Global Compact Network is an excellent forum for engaging with other companies on this topic, and BSF was part of the Global Compact Anti-Corruption Working Group and signed the anti-corruption call to action. And I would encourage any companies who are listening here to get involved with Global Compact Network Canada, or with forums within their industry to commit as an industry to ethical business practices. As an example of a more industry-focused initiative, BSF is a founding member of Together for Sustainability, which is a global audit program that assesses and improves sustainability practices within supply chains of the chemical industry. And it's also supports the principles of Global Compact, as well as responsible care. And the Together for Sustainability audit covers multiple topics related to sustainability, such as health and safety, labor and human rights, as well as governance issues. And it's intended to ensure that our relationship with customers and suppliers is responsible, resilient, and fosters knowledge sharing to enable sustainability. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for sharing these examples, Marion. Patricia, what are some examples of how SNC Lavaland engages in collective action to prevent corruption?
Actually, Neelam and Marion also brought very good points, especially towards suppliers, vendors, and so on. So obviously we do the same, but we also we actually share our story. You know, when I answered the first question, I told you about our past history, scandals relating to corruption and so on. So we actively really share with either third parties that are directly engaged with us and directly or not at all, from, you know, what we've learned from the experience, you know, how the phoenix raised from his ashes. So some of other initiative also that we've taken is that we, on a local basis where we have operation, we also either are participating to or created also some local integrity networks. So we're trying to reach, other companies in the same region than us, being able to talk, on roundtables and share our best practice or knowledge and so on. From a global perspective, we also participate very actively to PACHI, which is Partnering Against Corruption Initiative, B20, OECD, to make sure that the business world is also engaged to fight corruption. And internally, what we do also, we have example, one of our program is to meet with labor brokers or recruitment agencies. I'm sorry. Getting back from a cold now. So recruitment agency in Asia and Middle East, where we do see that there's maybe a higher risk of modern slavery or forced labor with, debt bondage and so on from these agencies. So what we do is that we meet with them, we provide them a training, we explain to them our expectation. We tell them more about our supplier code of conduct, what they need to respect and so on, to be able really to prevent as much as possible anything related to modern slavery and forced labor. So that's about it.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for summarizing these great initiatives. I'd like to now bring everyone's attention back to our final Slido question of the day. It will also be multiple choice. So I'll just ask everyone to visit their Slido browsers one more time. What do you think are some of the biggest obstacles to eliminating or prohibiting corruption in the private sector? We have 4 options here: lack of transparency, the absence of principles-based approach to ensuring anti-corruption, misunderstanding about what constitutes corruption, and inadequate corporate governance mechanisms. We'll give everyone 20 seconds to respond. Okay, fantastic. It's great to see everyone's answers coming in again. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone for providing your answers. Okay, so our next question will be from Marion. With the risk assessments and reporting becoming more universally adopted, what are some of the challenges businesses may face when trying to build resilience into their core functions?
So Daria, I think I would perhaps turn this question around and speak a little bit more about opportunities versus challenges, because I think there's a recognition, or I hope at least there's now a recognition, that ethical business is good business. And as well as a recognition of the harm that could be brought about by corrupt business practices, including damage to reputation, costly regulatory and legal proceedings, and loss of business focus. So at least from my perspective, this makes for a very straightforward business case that one can make to any executives or any decision makers who may not, for whatever reason, buy into this. And again, this goes back to our earlier discussion about reputation. All one has to do is turn on the news and consider that you don't want to be the company featured on the nightly news in connection with corrupt business practices. So I think as a result of this and this recognition, there's a real opportunity for companies to be very vocal about their commitment to ethical business practices and implement and push through sound processes to fight corruption and money laundering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Patricia, I would like to ask the same question. So with risk assessments and reporting becoming more universally adopted, what are some of the challenges businesses may face when trying to build resilience into their core functions?
I would say that you can't have a program and say, well, I have a program now, it's just there and just follow it. I think you need to use various ways and means to ensure that you do a continuous improvement and look for, as Marian mentioned, opportunities to be able to improve it. What is really, really important is not to be complacent at any point in time. You always need to be on the go, right? So identify new and upcoming risk, keep employee engaged too. There's a lot of fatigue sometimes of hearing again, over and over again, the same message coming from ethics and compliance. And your program can't work if you don't have their engagement, because their engagement is part of making sure that you have a strong culture in place of integrity. So to be able to not create too much that fatigue, I would say that you need to think about your process, right? So if you have a policy in place or some controls in place or a system, instead of building, one beside each other as a silo, try to integrate all the existing process within the organization, so the employees won't have to go through two different systems to be able to engage with a third party. So work example with procurement, work with IT, other function also, because ethics and compliance and corruption is not the only risk that a company could face when dealing with a third party. It could be anything related to health and safety, global security, data privacy, sustainability, obviously, and so on. So make sure that you have, a common workflow together, so employees see that it's easier for them and you're not making this difficult for them to be able to follow it. Also, I would say have a clear line to the board. If integrity or ethics and compliance or whatever you want to call it in your business does not have a direct reporting line to the board, if you do have a board, it might be very hard for you to get the buy-in, right? So you may have to work even more to be able to get things happened. Someone told me, like you would be dead in the water. I don't know if it's the right expression in English, but so I would say that those are the things that you need to look at.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for your insights. Neelam, with risk assessments and reporting becoming more universally adopted, what are some of the challenges businesses may face when trying to build resilience into their core functions?
Yeah, good question. And I'll start by kind of echoing what Marianne said around it does, I mean, certainly for Blackberry as a publicly traded company, we almost feel like, or felt like, there's some of the topics that we've talked about today, resilience, anti-corruption, anti-bribery, etc., are just a hygiene for organizations, hygiene factor. So it's in some ways, in at least in the countries that we operate in, there will be some element of surprise where organizations don't have frameworks in place. It is important, again, that the board members are endorsing and acting as role models, and the C-suite too, for these priorities. But I would say that from a resilience perspective, if the pandemic hasn't shown companies and other organizations, not just companies, that having a plan and stress testing their resilience is important, then I think that it's going to be hard to convince those organizations otherwise, because if you look at what the pandemic has shown us, it's been kind of the ultimate stress test for organizational systems. So people have had to work from different locations than they would normally, and almost on an immediate basis when the lockdowns started. And they also have had to look at the supply chain resilience, the resilience of their supply chain. If you take the automotive industry, for example, the pandemic impacted production in such a dramatic way, and continues to today, from manufacturing plants having to be shut down at the beginning of the pandemic. And now today there are chip shortages. And so whilst if there may be some organizations today that don't see resilience as core to their operations, I would say that with changes in how we work, the supply chain impacting, or becoming so clear that supply chain resilience is important to every organization, because we operate in such a global way, and then also different governments focus increasing on these factors too, whether it's resilience from a cybersecurity perspective, supply chain resilience, the ability for organizations to be able to work from home, and the regulations around network security. It has to be core to an organization moving forward. So yes, it can be hard to measure, hard to implement, but I think the kind of the need is unquestionable.
Thank you so much, Neelam. Those are wonderful examples, and thank you. I believe we'll have time for one more question from our panelists. So let's begin. So much of the discussion around anti-corruption is negative and deals with what could go wrong and what does go wrong. I would like to flip the script and ask, what makes you hopeful and excited about the future of corporate governance and anti-corruption work? Patricia, let's begin with you.
Thanks. I think that last year, with everything that happened with COVID and so on, as Neelam mentioned, we've businesses that are still here today probably have built a lot of resilience. But I think they also understood that everything is connected together, whatever it's human rights, labor, environment, or anti-corruption. All of these dots are the same, right? So if you want to be able to be successful in business, as Marianne mentioned, it's kind of your type of hygiene, right? You also need to look at these things. So I think that I've seen a lot of organizations now taking a more holistic approach, I would say, to all the principles from Global Compact, and managing the different risks in collaboration, multifunction together, by creating example like what we've done, committees that will work on the project together. So you may have people from HR, people from legal, ethics and compliance, health and safety, sustainability, whatever. You have people working together, subject matter expert that will connect the dot and will make sure that you're successful in delivering what you need to deliver. So diversity, of these different teams really reinforce creativity, innovation, problem solving, decision making, and so on. I would also say culture. I think there's more and more space now where we do talk about having the right culture in our business. So, as SNC Lavaland, at one point in time, we changed our function name from compliance to integrity, because for us, it was much more than just, respecting the law and respecting the rules. It was really actually promoting doing the right thing. And I see that in more and more companies right now. And that's why, it's becoming more and more popular. Everyone talks about ESG. It's really trendy right now to talk about ESG. So working with multiple stakeholders all over, really would help you ensuring having the right governance within your organization and being able to work towards common goals.
Thank you so much for that, Patricia. It was really great to hear from you.
Thanks.
Neelam, I'd also like to ask you the same question. What makes you hopeful and excited about the future of corporate governance and anti-corruption work?
Yeah, I would say the fact that it's the conversation is becoming more prevalent and more visible, and as well as that, we're seeing the community work together to make sure that that people are working in the right way and holding people accountable. And I say people, that could mean suppliers or other ecosystem partners, but holding one another accountable, and not having flexibility in how they allow the ecosystem to adhere to the rules, because they may, as I mentioned earlier, a company may feel that another partner of theirs is really important to them. In today's environment, at least it feels to me like that the accountability is inflexible. So people are held to high standards. It's becoming more and more visible, and everybody, whether they're competitors or not, are working together to kind of move towards that greater good goal, even though it may not be directly attributable to, say, revenue, for example. And we all know that indirectly it has a big impact. But maybe with those actions not being directly attributable to revenue, people are still making these topics more and more important as part of their day-to-day operations and day-to-day conversations, and seeming to work together and putting other factors like competition to the side when it comes to these important topics.
Thank you so much, Neelam. Thank you for sharing with us. Marian, I'd also like to ask you the same question. What makes you hopeful and excited about the future of corporate governance and anti-corruption work?
Great. Well, thank you. And as I said in my last response, I see much opportunity in this area. As someone who lives compliance and corporate governance every day, it's really refreshing to see companies placing real value on these topics. And not to be viewed just as a cost center, but as a value-added service and partner to the business on these topics is really fantastic. I think there is a widespread recognition that ethical business is good business, and topics like corporate governance, adhering to the code of conduct was perhaps in the past viewed more as a check the box exercise. And I've seen that change. And when I see our business colleagues and leaders being very vocal about these topics, it makes me hopeful that the principles we've been discussing here today are becoming ingrained into the fabric of how we do business.
Thank you so much, Marian. I appreciate that. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you also to our wonderful panelists for your time today and your continued efforts in working to combat corruption and strengthening your corporate governance. For more information around the topics of today's session, please visit our website or reach out to us at programs@globalcompact.ca. We'd also like to invite you all to the next and final session of the series, Canada and Beyond, a principles-based approach to building back better, which can take place on August 12th. I'd also like to ask our panelists if you can please turn on your cameras. We'd like to take a screenshot of the panel today for our social media. Thank you, and stay safe, everyone, and have a wonderful day.